Illinois state capitol. This is your Capitol Connection.
Welcome to Capitol Connection. I'm Mark Maxwell. Just last week, we got to hear directly from Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue as he visited Decatur and the Farm Progress Show. By his side were 4 of Illinois' 5 Republican members of Congress, and one of them joins us now from the WMBD studios in Peoria, Congressman Darin LaHood. Congressman, good to have you with us.
Hey, Mark, good to be with you and your viewers.
Congressman, one of the big topics of discussion at that Farm Progress Show was this pending, yet to be settled negotiation between Mexico and Canada, the USMCA. I know you've been actively encouraging House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to take it up for a vote upon returning to Congress immediately, I believe were your words. How confident are you that she will do that, or do you suspect or have concern that she may put that off for a while?
Well, if you put politics aside, Mark, and you look at the substance and the merits of this agreement, it is good for our agriculture community, it's good for our manufacturers, it's good for America. And, 40% of the products we grow, produce, or manufacture in Illinois go to Mexico or Canada. This will be our largest trade agreement ever negotiated. Our 2 largest trading partners, Mexico and Canada. 98% of the corn that Mexico imports comes from the United States, much of it from the Midwest. You look at this agreement, it is a good one for the long-term viability of this country. It's good for jobs. Remember, we're only 4.5% of the world's population. We have to have markets outside of the U.S., and this agreement does that. So I've urged Speaker Pelosi to bring this to the floor. Put politics aside. Let's help America. This will do that. And so I'm optimistic when we get back next week, we'll have a debate about this. We'll bring it before the Ways and Means Committee first, and we'll get it to the floor for a vote.
We do already have NAFTA in place, like you said, so American farmers already have customers in Mexico and in Canada. So is there any way that the USMCA is measurably better than NAFTA? And is there any hope or any optimism that this deal can actually expand those markets for American farmers?
Well, absolutely. Particularly our dairy farmers. Our dairy farmers had lots of barriers in place, a number of tariffs, particularly with Canada. This new agreement frees up those tariffs, those countervailing duties, puts in place fair trade, which we did not have during NAFTA. So this is good for dairy farmers and for a number of our other commodities. It equals the playing field when it comes to trade with Mexico and Canada. Secondly, we put a provision in here, it's called rules of origin. It means when cars are manufactured or machinery is manufactured, the rules of origin go up to 72%. That means more jobs in America. And so this is good for workers, it's good for organized labor. This is going to help more products to be produced in America and less in Mexico and Canada, and that's a good thing for our country. Those are 2 provisions, but overall, any economist that you talk to will tell you this is a good agreement for this country and a lot better than NAFTA. Think about this. When NAFTA was negotiated, we didn't even have a section on technology or intellectual property. We've updated that, and again, this is a good agreement for this country.
There are reports out just this week that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has voiced concern to Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau about some of the enforcement mechanisms in the USMCA. She fears they may not be strong enough on the environment or on labor standards in Mexico. But one thing she also raised, and I want to highlight this with you, is the cost of prescription drug prices. Canada often comes up in this discussion because people in Canada, patients there, can buy prescription drugs at a far lower rate, a far cheaper cost than we can buy them here in this country. Are there any modifications or tweaks or negotiations that can be done in this USMCA that can have the effect of lowering the cost of prescription drug prices here in the U.S.?
Well, I know the Trump administration, specifically Ambassador Bob Lighthizer, our trade ambassador, has been working with Speaker Pelosi on these concerns. I know she put together a task force on this. I want to be careful that we're not moving the goalposts in the middle of the game. With a trade agreement, it has to be voted up or down, but you can have a side agreement to address a number of these issues. And if there are serious concerns regarding prescription drugs or the cost of those, I think those can be addressed in a side agreement. But we got to focus on what this is going to do for America. But clearly, I think this administration has bent over backwards to help to alleviate some of these concerns. What I don't want to have happen, Mark, is that because politics and partisanship come into this, that the Congress doesn't want to give the president a perceived win on this. This is a win for America. This is a win for farmers. It's a win for manufacturers. And that needs to be our real focus.
But these kinds of trade negotiations can be once in a generation often. So if the window here is closing, is there any hope that Republicans and this president can offer and deliver on cheaper prescription drugs before this 2020 election?
Absolutely. I think there's many options on the table in terms of holding our pharmaceutical companies accountable. There's a number of provisions introduced in the Ways and Means Committee in bringing more competition, more transparency to the process. Put USMCA aside. There's plenty of other legislative options to work on in a bipartisan way to bring down the high cost of prescription drugs, and we have a responsibility and an obligation to do that, and I'm committed to finding a solution on it.
There's also a lot of discussion on the world stage about how to take President Trump's rhetoric or his negotiating posture. He can be a bit erratic at times. For example, even farmers at the Farm Progress Show just this last week asked you and the other members of Congress, do you have a read on the president's pulse here and where his heart is at? So with his track record and his negotiating style, can Mexico or can Canada really trust this president that he won't renege on any deal that he cuts with them?
Well, absolutely. And if you look at it, Mexico has already signed this agreement and passed their legislature. Canada has already, again, worked with Trudeau and their legislature and signed it. It's ready to go. We're just waiting on America. So clearly those negotiations, and again, these negotiations didn't involve politics. They involved policy and working on getting this deal right. And we're the last ones to pass it. And so this will be a good agreement. It's negotiated in good faith. And in terms of your prior point, Mark, do I think we ought to be coalescing with our other allies when it pertains to going after China? Absolutely. China continues to rip us off. They've been doing that for 25 years in technology, but they've also been doing the same thing to our European allies, to the Japanese, the Koreans. I think we ought to be partnering with our allies to go after the Chinese, to hold them accountable. And unfortunately, we're in this trade war now. I know that hurts our farmers. It hurts our manufacturing. But most of my farmers are Americans first and farmers second. They want to beat China. They want to make sure that we're holding them accountable and make sure that they don't continue to rip us off.
All right, I'd like to ask you about one of your other recent interactions with President Trump, specifically about former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich. You said, quote, "I don't think the president understood the extensive nature of the public corruption that Rod Blagojevich had engaged in." The president, of course, was considering commuting his sentence and letting him out of prison. But when you laid it all out for him, you said that you thought the president was surprised by those facts. What gave you that impression, that the president didn't know what Rod Blagojevich had done?
Well, listen, the president's a very busy man, and one thing I've learned about him is he listens to all sides on all issues and then makes the best decision. And clearly he has the ability to issue clemency and pardons, and I was one person along with many others that weighed in on my opposition to granting clemency to Rod Blagojevich, and all I said to the president and his team is, think long and hard before you do this. Remember, 4 of our last 8 governors have gone to federal prison for public corruption. And what Rod Blagojevich did caused immense damage to our state and to our government. You look at the corruption charges, you look at the bribery, you look at the extortion, you look at the fraud. You got to remember what he did. And remember the fact, and I told this to his team, Rod Blagojevich never apologized, was never remorseful, never admitted what he did was wrong. And you listen to those tape recordings the FBI did where he is shaking down a hospital executive in Chicago for $50,000 or they're not going to get their funding, or shaking down a racetrack owner for $50,000. I mean, this is the type of corruption that we're trying to change in Illinois. And, you know, I said this, that in my view, Rod Blagojevich is the definition of the swamp, and it's exactly what we're trying to change in Illinois. And I express my opinion. I'm a former federal prosecutor. I let him know my views on it. But again, I know a lot of other people did too, and he listened to me like he listens to everybody else.
As a former federal prosecutor and as the person who holds his former seat, are you comfortable with the news that came out this Wednesday that officially now Aaron Schock has been cleared of all charges through deferred prosecution, a deal with the feds? Are you comfortable with how that ended?
Well, listen, this has been a long 5 years of litigation between the U.S. Department of Justice, federal prosecutors, with Aaron Schock and lots of others. And, it ended with a resolution today. It was a long legal battle, and I wish him well.
You mentioned the swamp a moment ago. I'd like to ask you about something one of your colleagues on Capitol Hill said recently. Used to be a Republican, now he's an independent congressman from Michigan, Justin Amash. He highlighted a piece of reporting that actually singled out Democrats on Capitol Hill who have to raise a certain amount of money, and in exchange for that campaign cash, maybe they get a higher seat on a committee or their legislation advances through more quickly. He said Republicans do that too. He said it's plainly corrupt, in his words, to be compelled to raise money and campaign for your party in exchange for official government assignments. and or benefits. First of all, have you observed that happening? Is it going on? And if so, how is that any different than what Rod Blagojevich was doing?
Well, I think it's apples and oranges. First of all, I'm not familiar with what Justin Amash said. I'm not sure I'm familiar with what he's talking about there. I can only speak for myself on this, and I'm not aware of that.
So you've never seen Republican leadership ask for people to raise campaign cash, and in exchange, maybe through a wink and a nod agreement, that they'd have a more powerful committee assignment, or that their legislation would speed through on a fast track?
No, I have not seen that at all. And I would remind you too, Mark, Justin Amash has left our Republican Party, is now an independent. Obviously, he's been very critical of our Republican Party, and so I wouldn't put too much stock in what he says as somebody that's kind of a disgruntled Republican.
Maybe one other disgruntled Republican is another former Illinois Republican Congressman, Joe Walsh, who announced his intention to run against President Trump in a primary challenge. I'm going to ask you about Joe Walsh in a moment, but first, do you think it's healthy for a Republican primary challenge, even against a sitting president? Is that a good thing?
Well, I think primaries, whether it's at the local level, the federal level, the state level, can be healthy for the process. I've had a primary opponent almost every election, and I think it's, again, healthy. It's part of our democracy and can make any candidate a better candidate.
Joe Walsh, the former one-term Illinois Republican congressman from the Chicago suburbs, said this, and I want to get your reaction to it. He said, President Trump is unfit to be president. He's a pathological liar and a malignant narcissist who believes he's above the law. Walsh called the president a danger to the country who must not be elected. And most Republicans notice, he said, but they stay silent. Can you address that last part? Are Republicans having reservations or concerns about this president, but keeping them to himself out of fear he may retaliate or attack them, or for some other reason?
Well, I look at the results in this economy right now. I look at the results that President Trump has brought. I mean, we got the lowest unemployment we've had in 50 years. We got the best economy in 25 years, record unemployment in the African-American community, record unemployment in the Hispanic community. You look at the prosperity of the stock market over the last 2.5 years. I look at the results of putting America back on top, what we've done with rebuilding our military. You talk to anybody that serves in the military now, how proud they are to serve in the military. Enforcing the rule of law along our southern border. We had 160,000 people try to cross our southern border in May, and President Trump has put a real emphasis on that. So I look at those results. I don't always agree with the tweets, or it wouldn't be language that I would use, but the results are real, and I see that in my district. It doesn't mean we don't have challenges. We clearly do. But the direction of the country is going strong economically right now.
All right, I've asked you about a couple former Illinois Republican members of Congress. I want to ask you about another member of Congress who may soon join their ranks as a former. He's the most tenured senior among you. It's John Shimkus, a longtime veteran there on Capitol Hill. He announced he's not going to seek re-election in 2020, opening up a wide field of other candidates to try and run and vie to replace him. Who do you like in that field, and what do you want to see in a candidate to replace Congressman Shimkus?
Well, first of all, John Shimkus has admirably served our country, whether it was as a West Point graduate or as a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, or serving in his local area there, or being in Congress for the last 20 years. John has done an excellent job serving his constituents and representing this country with honor, and I wish him well. Listen, he just announced his retirement. I know there'll be a number of people interested in that. We'll let the process play out the way that it should and see who jumps into the primary and wants to represent that district.
Would you like to see a woman run in that race?
Listen, I want the best quality person to run in that race, whether it's a man or woman or whoever it is. We need the best person to run. And listen, that's why we have a participatory democracy. That's why we have elections. That's why we have primaries. And so I assume we'll have a lot of people interested in that congressional seat.
All right, Congressman LaHood, always a pleasure to catch up. Thank you so much for the time.
Mark, thanks. Great to be with you and your viewers.
And when we come back, one of those Republicans who could be running for John Shimkus' seat joins us, Mike Marin, a House Republican here in Springfield, wants to trade in his position for one in Congress. We're back in a moment.